You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, somebody I've been excited to talk to because his coverage of the military is nothing short of outstanding. We'll get to him in just a moment. Just a few reminders before we get started. As always, continue to leave us Apple ratings and reviews wherever you get your Apple podcasts. Leave us a rating and review. We're continuing to grow. Want to crack the top 100 Apple podcasts? Can only do that with your reviews. Doesn't have to be a lengthy review, but wherever you get your Apple podcasts, you can do it on your smartphone as well. 5 stars, short review. Tell us why you love the show. We'll post them on social media, and we appreciate all the support of the show continually. Speaking of social media, follow us on every platform: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Hazard Ground Podcast. And of course, don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. You go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll direct you right to Amazon. You do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We get a percentage of what you guys spend. And of course, we donate a percentage of that back right to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. Also really easy from your smartphone. Go to hazardground.com on your smartphone, and it'll redirect you right to the app. So all your credit card information is saved. Really simple and convenient, and an easy way for you to help out veterans all across America right from your smartphone. Joining us this week is a 13-year member of the Army National Guard, currently holds the rank of E6. He has been a Cav Scout and deployed to Afghanistan. What's interesting about his career is while doing all of this, he has managed to become an individual who covers the military at length, currently as a ground combat reporter for military.com. He's covered Capitol Hill and the Department of VA for Stars and Stripes, also worked for Political, the Washington Examiner, National Guard Magazine, and Military Times. He is Steve Beynon, joining us on the Hazard Ground podcast. Steve, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. You and I have gone back and forth on Twitter several times. As I've told people, military Twitter is a fun and exciting and interesting place, but
yeah,
it can be a little bit, insular at times, but it is a great way to start some great conversations. That's how you and I met. But it all full disclosure again, your work is outstanding. It is right down the middle of the road. It's objective. It's smart. It gets right to the point, cuts through a lot of the fluff. And I think when it comes to these complicated times for the military, it's voices like yours in the space where veterans are reading it on an outlet like military.com that is so needed. So again, thank you for all your dedication and your hard work in your craft.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right. So with that out of the way, we'll get to how you got there to begin with, but let's start back at the beginning and how and why you got into the Army.
Yeah. So I enlisted in the Ohio National Guard in 2008, and I wish I had a super patriotic story behind it, but I was kind of juggling this. I want to be in the military. I want to go to war. I want to see what it is. But I wasn't really willing to sacrifice things I wanted to do in the civilian life. And I didn't know about the National Guard really at the time until a recruiter came into my math class and told us about it. And it seemed like best of both worlds thing. I get to go to war, I get to go to college, I get to build my career all at the same time. And I swear I'm not a recruiter. There's a lot of reasons to not join the National Guard or the military as a whole. But for me, in that specific case, and this is like peak recession right now. So the economy is really in question. And I also looked at it as a backup career. And I don't come from a family with means, and I wasn't willing to get any student debt or anything. So, hey, they said, hey, go to war. We'll pay for your school, and you'll get a paycheck. And me at 17 with parents' permission, it sounded like a no-brainer.
Parents' permission. So, again, 2 wars are raging at this time. They said, hey, Steve, best of luck. Love you. See you soon.
And this is the I like to think that I'm an honest gentleman 99.99% of the time, but I wasn't completely honest with my mother the job I was enlisting as. Because we were talking about me being in an MP or something, and I found out what that really was and meant. It didn't really appeal to me, and I found out about Cav Scouts, and that sounded really cool, but it sounds really dangerous, and I don't want mother Googling it and seeing what that's all about. So I just said, yeah, it's still an MP. Just sign right here.
So you lied.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll say that to you right now. But I was excited to get in, and I didn't want to wait.
At what point did mom find out the truth?
Right after she signed it.
Oh, how did that conversation?
Yeah, right. She was a little upset. It wasn't an anger thing. It was more of shake the head, but hey, all right, you did what you had to do, and you got what you wanted. Just don't get killed out there.
Now, full disclosure, did you sign up for the National Guard knowing one day you'd ask to be a bus driver?
No, I did not. No, that was not. So that's a bigger conversation. These domestic,
I know.
We'll get to that. We'll get
for the
to
viewers
that.
watching. Steve and I have gone back and forth, and I have said this often. If you follow me on social media, the National Guard now is being used by certain governors because there's a shortage of bus drivers who take kids to school every day, which is, I'll say it bluntly, a far overreach by governors and adjutant generals to employ the National Guard in that manner, because literally it's not our job. Your taxes pay the government funds to be able to get through situations like this, not deploy the National Guard because they're a convenient toy for governors and adjutant generals to have. So that's why I asked Steve that question. He was sort of an inside joke that we had to pull the curtains back on.
Yeah, right. No, I did not answer. I thought I was going to go fight wars, and then maybe once in a while I'll go pick up trees out of the road after a hurricane. Yeah,
and then the wheels on the bus go round and round.
Yeah. Everybody
on the bus, good, great, grand, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So you sign up right off the basic training. Because you didn't have much of any military experience and didn't really have a lot of wherewithal. Was basic training a surprise?
Yeah, I never shot a gun up until basic training. I never had there's no military background in my family. My grandpa was in the British Navy years ago during World War II, but I never really got to meet him or hear about it. So I didn't grow up with that. I was the first one in my school to think that the military is an idea. And I think it was more of an impulse. Like I said, I broke down the reasons to go in. And that sounds like a long thinking process, but I really think, like, looking back on it, I think it was maybe like a 3-day process of me thinking about it, just pulling the trigger on it. But absolutely no military background. There wasn't, this is before YouTube or anything. There wasn't a lot of videos of shark attacks. There wasn't a lot of information out there. I didn't know what a ruck march was. So I knew it was going to be tough. I knew it was going to be screamed at, but I had no center of gravity of what it looked like and the specifics of what it was going to be.
Do you think in retrospect that helped you? Not, are you the type of person, if knowing what you were getting into ahead of time might have deterred you? Is it just one of those things where the suck was easier when you didn't know it was the suck?
Yeah. So I think this is an interesting thing I've always wanted to look at, is since, you kind of think about something like, I mean, obviously basic training is nowhere near this, but you think about something like the Q course or BUDS, there's no shortage of information on that, but I would love to see numbers of an alternate universe where there's no information on like BUDS or any special operations course, of the people that go in with no information, and then how many people go in with all the information. I would always be curious to see how much that psychs people out.
Believe it or not, it's a question I often ask a lot of Green Berets and Navy SEALs who come on the show. We have a little bit of background on it. And really, I think it just varies from individual to individual. Some guys are okay with not knowing. And a lot of people take the approach, all I knew was that it was going to suck. And if I could just survive to the end of the day, I'd worry about the next day next. So they just looked at it sort of in segments that way. Whatever was going on, the suck was eventually going to stop in a 24-hour period to restart again. And that's the mentality they approached it with. Other people were hordes for information, like they the more you could give them, the better they could absorb it and adjust. I think really it just varies from person to person on how they handle it.
I love doing cool guy stuff. I love the suck, but at the level of the CAV unit or infantry company suck. I don't know if I would have ever considered special operations in a world without things like surviving the cut. But I know when I saw the episode of Selection where the guy puts his puke in his cargo pocket, I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm good here. I got my own suck. It's a level that I like.
All right. So after basic training, right out to Fort Knox for CAV school.
Yeah, it was at Fort Knox at the time. It's at Fort Benning now. Yeah, I think it was like 16 weeks nonstop. My favorite drill sergeant stories are, I had one that was wicked in combatives. Actually, I'm into jujitsu now. So I don't know if that led into that. Um, but he would love to sneak up on us and just put us in rear neck and chokes. So I would be doing, I'd be mopping the floors at 2 in the morning, and he would just come up. I remember he came up on me once, choked me out, and then I woke up, and he was walking away, and he just looked at me, and he just said, "I would just want you to know I could kill you whenever I wanted to." And this other drill sergeant, when it was over his time to, because they would take, there's different days where they had to stay all night and watch us. When it was his night, he would order a pizza, and he would blare like Barbie Girl and just smoke the dog shit out of us until he finished his pizza, and then he went to bed.
Very nice. Is there any point during this whole experience where you're feeling like maybe this wasn't a good idea?
No. I think, which is strange, because I didn't grow up. I never played a sport or anything. I didn't have a lot of, I had an athletic ability that was enough to not fall out, but definitely not, standing above anyone else or anything. I think it was more of just, there was a struggle. Like, everyone else, like everyone at the time, I had a girlfriend, and, you couldn't call home. This was before cell phones were really a big thing. And, I went through the same stuff everyone else did. But I never had a I should quit moment, more than anyone else did, or anything like that. I didn't have any regrets. And thankfully, stuff like, Cap Scout school and through school, it's really short, thankfully.
Yeah. So you have this desire to go to combat. How quickly does that happen for you?
So I get to my first unit in 2009. I enlisted in 2008, but you have to wait a year to go to, before they send you to basic training, because you still technically need a high school diploma to go. So I was doing this weird National Guard weekend stuff, but I didn't have a haircut yet. You just show up wearing whatever, and they show you what a compass looks like, but you don't, weird little stuff. It was a paycheck, it was like $150. And that's a lot for a 17-year-old. But yeah, get to my first unit. There's a cavalry unit in the Ohio Guard. They were actually in Iraq when I showed up. And I just felt like the biggest asshole, being on, I couldn't control, but I'm on rear det with like 3 other guys for most of my first year in the Guard. I don't do any training, anything cool. We're just kind of hanging out. You clean the armory, and nothing really happens. And everyone comes back with, combat patches, combat action badges. They had a very legitimate deployment. And you just kind of stand out, and you sort of feel like a jerk. You have that combat FOMO for sure. When
do you actually get to a position where you're going to combat?
This is the following year. I was frantically volunteering for deployments, thinking I would miss out on the wars. We were much younger back then, thinking I'd lose out on Afghanistan or Iraq. And there was no shortage of deployment. This is right around the time the Obama surge is happening.
In Afghanistan.
Yeah, everyone's going somewhere. If you want deployment, it's going to happen. I volunteered for about like 3 or 4 different ones going on at the time. They kept getting delayed or pushed. I wasn't picked. I actually went to an internship in San Francisco. And as soon as I got off the plane, I get a call from I don't know why, but I remember it was a colonel calling me. And at the time, he was like, is this Private Beynon? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, hey, you need to report to, we're reporting out of Medina, Ohio, to go on the deployment. And to where I thought I was being punked or something. Like, I thought it was one of my friends, like, playing a joke on me. And I was like, what? And then in my head, I was like, dude, I've been begging to deploy for a year. And I just got on a flight to California for a couple months. You couldn't tell me beforehand. So I was a little peeved about that. Showed up at my internship and put in my 2 weeks notice and came home. I was very excited. I got to deploy with a lot of veterans. All the NCOs had a lot of experience. My team leader was like an 82nd guy. Our platoon sergeant had a ton of Guard experience. And then we were able to go to Helmand Province, which is a very kinetic area. And we were only Army units that were there. It's mostly at the time it was mostly Marines, and that's where a lot of the European forces were at. And I think like a lot of young men, I was definitely full of piss and vinegar.
Piss and vinegar,
ready to get after it.
Quick question for you before we get into the deployment itself. Obviously, it's the National Guard. You mentioned there was an internship. What were you doing on the civilian side while you were in a drilling status for a year plus?
Yeah, so I was just a college student. God, I don't remember the job. Like I had the internship. I had a lot of odd jobs. I worked at like a GameStop. I did mall security for a little bit. I worked at like a burrito place. So it was a lot of different odd jobs at the time.
Okay, all right. Yeah. You didn't get any GameStop stock back then, did you?
No.
Okay.
That's the first thing that's the first thing I'm gonna do when I get my time machine.
Go back and hang on to a couple of hundred shares.
Yeah. Hey, take that $20,000 enlistment bonus. Don't buy a new couch. Just blow it all on GameStop. Just eat ramen noodles for a couple of years and deal with it.
Okay, so you're headed to the Helmand Province. What do you know about your deployment prior to getting there, like mission set and things of that nature?
I know absolutely nothing. I like to think of myself as a guy who reads up on things now, but at the time I'm young. I think I'm 19. I didn't read anything about Afghanistan. It's a place I wanted to go to, but knew absolutely nothing about. It was like just young, dumb guy. I didn't know what provinces were. You know, they just say Helmand, and I was like, yeah, sure. What's that? A town? I don't know. I didn't know what the situation was. I didn't know anything. Our mission was effectively to just do patrols around villages, down roads and stuff like that. PSD. It was generally just to have a presence in this crappy fob that was a point of reference to people that are familiar. It was maybe about 40 miles north of Lashkargah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't know how much you're going to be patrolling. If you're going to be patrolling, they didn't give you any sort of concept of that until you got on ground.
No. I mean, we did a lot of dismounted training, and that's what a lot of it ended up like. But I remember during the train up, there wasn't a lot of thinking about Afghanistan. We trained out of Camp Shelby, Mississippi.
Oh, yeah.
If anyone's not familiar with that, it is just this hot, humid, swampy southern area. We're doing battle drills in the woods. We're doing patrol bases. I mean, the training was good. We got to do a lot of cool urban ops, squad, platoon, live fires, convoy stuff. But half the time, it felt like we were training for Vietnam. There was no, here's how a metal. I mean, like because you walk in a file in most patrols in Afghanistan, and there's some metal detectors and stuff like that. They don't go over that because we're still fanning out these huge distances in the woods, clearing areas and objectives and stuff like that, where in reality, you don't really, that's not how the game is played in Afghanistan in reality.
No. Yeah. And again, I remember us going through some of the similar things in Iraq, or at least the train up for it. You know, I mean, the closest thing we got to reality was mount training, you know, and working through doors and cities and buildings. Like that was the closest thing we got. As far as the road stuff, they were way out of their depth. And this was my first deployment was 05. So, you know, training up to that, they were way out of their depth from what we were facing. The gap between training and reality is always there. The job is to try to close it as much as possible. And to a certain extent, there's a certain level of success to it, but you know, you're never gonna be able to cover everything. So
I think the convoy stuff was just a couple days in the truck. There was you know, like an IED lane, you know, spot the IED. And I was like, isn't that trash can duct taped to a propane tank in the middle of the road? And they're like, yeah, that's it. I'd be like, okay, I found it. It wasn't very well, it wasn't very well thought out.
No, not at all. No. But by the way, what were your parents saying to you when you were raising your hand for all these deployments? Did they even know?
No, let's go back to me not being a complete open book to them and stuff. They did not know at the time I volunteered for anything, and neither did at the time the woman I was dating. And I will go back and say that is the wrong move. I was a younger man at the time and has since grown wiser and stuff.
What did you say to them when you told them you were leaving or that you were getting deployed?
I said, I mean, yeah, we went through the same conversation. I think a lot of people have. Hey, I'm going to Afghanistan, and I don't. It was a lot of I don't know. I mean, I don't blame my mother for having a thousand questions. Does your cell phone work? I don't know. How do I call you? Can you email? And I'm like, I don't know. And that's I mean, it was definitely not harder for her than it was for me. And I think that's the hardest part for families is it's almost like I don't know if the going's the bad part. It's the I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to contact you if something happens to you. There's this vague thing of, oh, the Red Cross will call you. It's like, how does that work? There's just not a lot of information or anything like that.
Full disclosure, I had a similar story. I accidentally let it slip to my mother that I was deploying the second time. So it was, I was picked up the phone one day, a call. I went out to lunch with a girl I was dating, and I had told her a couple of days before that, hey, look, I'm going to end up going back to Iraq, and she was upset and questioning our future, this, that, and the other. And I remember I had lunch with her, and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
And I ended up picking up my phone. My mother and I have a good relationship, but I just ended up calling her and started venting about this, that, and the other. And I was like, I told her about that I'm going to Iraq, and blah blah. And my mother was like, what? I'm like, oh shit, I didn't tell my mother yet. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. But see, now I don't know how to go the other way. There's a dichotomy where so I was trying to go to Kabul recently. And so I told everyone hey, I'm trying to do this. The odds are extremely low it's going to happen, but I just want you to know that I'm trying. And they're just like, what do you mean you're trying to go to Kabul? I'm like, I want to go to Kabul. And
that's where all the action is. I'm a ground combat reporter. I need to be in ground combat.
Yeah, it says it on my business card, so I need to,
If you're not living your business card, who are you? That's why mine just says all around good guy. So I'm never not living it. So
and my fiance, rightfully gets a little pissed off. She's like, I can't believe you're trying to go, and I was like, don't worry, it probably won't work out. And then I follow it up with well, if that doesn't work out, I could probably get to Syria or something. She's like, that's not the answer to that.
It's not a fair trade-off.
Not going to Kabul isn't answered with, I'm going to Syria then.
All right. You get back on ground or you finally get on ground in Afghanistan. What is your day-to-day life like when you get there? Operational tempo, mission set, everything.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I remember our first month there, we didn't do anything because our mission wasn't available or something. Like the FOB we were supposed to stay at was still occupied. The unit didn't leave country yet. And so the mission overlap was weird. And they just put us in Camp Leatherneck for 3 or 4 weeks. And we didn't do anything besides just zero weapons, and we had to get relicense on the vehicles for some reason. I don't know why. So that was very strange. And then they just found a mission for us on base to do Overwatch while the Danes trained the Afghan army on this little base that was attached to Camp Leatherneck. And Camp Leatherneck's a huge, massive base, or wasn't in Afghanistan. It's probably at the time there was probably 20,000 people there.
Sounds like Camp Liberty in Iraq.
Yeah. Prince Harry was actually stationed at the base, stapled to it. But then finally we got to where we were supposed to be. And then, so the day-to-day, we probably ran missions 2-3 times a week. And that would often involve mounted or dismounted patrols, either to just have a presence or we did random stuff I guess our FOB was this halfway point to this other FOB, and stuff would get dropped off on ours, and we would also be mailmen that would go to this other FOB that was another 20 miles down the road. I don't know why it couldn't get flown. I don't know why, but we did that once in a while. But yeah, it was just a lot of key leader engagements, stuff like that.
Is any of this at this point in time disappointing to you? This isn't what I wanted to do when I said I want to go to combat?
Well, it was very slow at first, and I almost had a reverse. I don't know if it was a reverse guilt thing or something like that, because you watch war movies and you got these bright-eyed kids, and then they go to war, and it's D-Day the first day they're there, and they're like, oh, this is bad. They just it's too much, and then I get there and it's too little. Our first engagement was probably 7 weeks into deployment, and I didn't even know we were engaged. I just remember we took a knee, set up. I was carrying the 240 at the time, and I just kind of set the bipod up. And I honestly think I thought the LT was doing a map check or radio check. I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. I was just a private, just going, oh, and then we get up and started walking again. And then we get back to the fob and do a little AAR. And then it was like, so y'all got shot at. And I was like, we did. I didn't know. I didn't know. So I was like, I didn't know. I thought there'd be more to it.
Yeah. Similar story again, anecdotally. When we first got engaged, I remember I sent an email back to everybody. And it was just like, I had a group email that I sent all my friends, and I just wrote in the subject line news, ... And I just wrote at the top, I got engaged, ... And then I hit return like 10 times in a row. And I went ... in combat, got shot at today. And I can't tell you how many people didn't read the bottom of the page, because I got like 3 emails back from girls being like, hey, congratulations. I'm like, no, you kind of missed the whole point of the email. Yeah. I did not get engaged while I was in Iraq. That would have sent more shockwaves to mom than anything else. But nonetheless. Yeah,
I think like maybe 2 or 3 engagements later, it was a legitimate gunfight. I got to return fire finally for the first time. But I remember there's always a joke where like combat action badges and infantry badges are weird. And I remember they gave them to us like a couple days after our first engagement. I was like, is this stolen valor? I don't even know I was getting shot at.
Yeah, no.
And I remember telling my team leader about it or something, and he was like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll earn it later."
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's interesting because again, I'm going through this whole VA process right now. Again, it's a personal headache that I'm not going to share here on the podcast. But they start asking questions about everything that you went through, and I'm like, there was a dozen times that I could have gotten a combat action badge. I only put it in once. And I didn't even do it. The chain of command did it for us.
Yeah.
I'm like, there was between getting blown up from an IED and everything, like that alone should have qualified for combat. It never even got written down. Like really? It was just because again, my first deployment. I was attached to CJ SOTF. I was with special operations. And so they don't care. They're not handing out awards and everything else. Like I was nice enough that like the last colonel that was there was like, hey, you guys, need to get this. And he directed the S1 to do it for us. Otherwise it would have never happened. Like I didn't initiate it. Again, I'm like, sir, it's kind of happened like a dozen times already. Like I don't really think anybody's complaining about it.
Yeah. See, you got to get an admin unit. A mortar round lands like a quarter of a click
Everybody's
away.
Listening in paperwork. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But that first engagement that you got into, that experience kind of sticks with you, obviously, right?
Yeah. Well, the first
real one you were talking about.
The first real one. So I'll never forget this, where the Army has a lot of rules. And mind you, this is Private Beynon's mindset. And I definitely hesitated to shoot. And mind you, I got the 240 and I'm hesitating to shoot. And so my squad leader is understandably very pissed and screaming at me. And I was just looking at him, like, what? And he's like, we're getting shot at. I was like, yeah, I know. And he's like, well, we'll shoot back. And I was just like, am I allowed to do that? Like, it was so strange. Like, it sounds so stupid looking back on it. I'll be the first person to tell you that. And it's like such an embarrassing story.
No, it's really not because, okay, well, so was there a part of you that paused? I mean, this is a topic we talk about a lot. Was there a part of you that paused because was there in some sense, some subconscious thought that once I do this, the world's different for me?
I don't know if it was that deep. I think it was almost more like it's almost like the same mindset, right? Like, have you ever been on a range and you just don't want to be the first person that shoots in case you're just like wrong and it's not cool to shoot yet? And then you hear another guy shoot and you're like, okay, cool, we can shoot now. It's like that. It's
fair enough.
It's the same thing. There was a couple sporadic rifle fire and I was like, okay, here's my sector. And then I also did it. Some I was actually really surprised about is you don't see people you shoot at necessarily. I mean, you get PID, you see maybe some movement, some muzzle flashes, but you're really just kind of, you're just kind of shooting at like maybe a patch of trees where you think they're at. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, I don't like see anybody. And that was kind of a hard concept for me to be like, oh, you don't necessarily literally have a human being in your optics or anything like that. That's just not really how it works. That's how I thought it would work, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, again, it does. Yeah. I was one of the first, and again, my mind at least processed all this, what feels like, it's a lot of thoughts to put in a split second, but it literally happened in a split second because I did the same thing. Is that a person or is that a shadow? What am I looking at?
Yeah.
And again, because by the time one particular engagement I had when I had fired for the first time, it was one of those things where I had seen other engagements happen from other people. And, you start to have conversations, and I'm a little bit of a deep thinker. And so I start to talk to fellow people there and everything. And there was that pause for a split moment for me that said, if I pull the trigger, round can't come back. Everything's different. And so I had that thought split second. And again, while I'm gauging, is that a target? Is it not a target? And then it just hits you in the back of the head. It's like, hey, shoot, stupid. Figure this out later.
Yeah, no, especially me with the machine gun. Like my job is just hey, don't worry about targets in the traditional sense. Your job is to just like put bullets in this direction and just keep their heads down. And while, other people find targets of opportunity and maneuver and stuff like that.
How often do you find yourself during the deployment in contact after the first couple? Is it routine?
Yeah, I would say on average it was about once a week, and it ranged from serious gunfights to someone just taking pot shots. I would say things I would consider serious gunfights maybe probably about once a week, and then another time that week there'd just be pot shots, or you think you hear something or something like that.
Did you guys sustain any casualties?
Yeah, actually. Okay, so this was the worst part of the deployment. We had 3 guys killed in a day. It was a single incident. And kind of going back to families and being unsure how things work, something happened to where the FRG got the news ahead of time before the families were notified. And they took some proactive approach and told all the families that they said 5. They were wrong with the count. They inflated it, which is worse. They just said 5 of the boys were killed and about 20 were injured. I don't know where they got that number. We had about 8 other people injured, ranging from an amputation to a scratch from shrapnel. And then the families obviously went into a complete meltdown on panic. And then we don't have cell phones or really access to computers or anything or easy access. Right. And we didn't even know this meltdown was happening at all. And that lasted for probably about, I was told probably about an afternoon's worth of time.
Did anybody get in trouble after the fact?
I think the leader of the FRG had to go and get replaced. Wow. The details are super murky. I never got the full story, but I remember, like my mother just heard, hey, 5 of the guys were killed, and then just not a follow-up. Like, what does that mean? Is it mine? We don't have names yet, which that's a horrible thing for families to go through.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously you weren't a reporter at this point in time because you're bad at getting the details of this story. So we'll blame it on amateurism at this point.
Yeah. But like I said, going back to me being a young man.
Right. What did the casualties do to the unit, to you? I mean, was there a awakening where you're like, damn, I thought this was going to be a different experience and now people are dead?
Yeah. So that's almost still like a weird dichotomy that I think I wrestle with, going back to the piss and vinegar, and that sort of motivated, not to pitch man stuff, it sort of motivated an article I wrote recently on younger soldiers who haven't gotten a chance to go to combat and just might completely miss out on it, having the perspective that I did when I was younger. But at the same time, I don't know if, like, there's no situation where I would change and like not have gone or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It definitely evolved me, made me a wiser person, a better person in the long run. But it definitely made things extremely real. And I think it took me like a solid year to like really process what actually happened. It's really hard. It's kind of hard to explain. I still don't really know how to articulate it. It's like something happening and you just go, okay, that happened. But you don't really, like, your brain is almost like holding like the reality of the situation from you. And then like months after the deployment, I was like, oh, holy shit, that happened. What
exactly happened? Can you share it?
Yeah, we were just doing a patrol, and there was there were 2, it was 1. There were 2 motorcycles approaching us. One had an IED, one did not. We killed the one that did not, and one came at us from an angle from a crowd. It was just really fast, fog of war. I think someone noticed it, but there were so many people there, and it was unclear if they were aiming for us, and they detonated at us, and yeah, they detonated, and it followed through with two gunmen took pop shots after that were somewhere else. So it was a complex ambush.
Right. Okay. Is there any part of you looking back on it that looks at that experience and wishes that you had focused on it more while you were there, or was it just sort of self-preservation to not even acknowledge it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's definitely different camps of people. And obviously I don't blame anyone that completely lost it in that moment or anything. There were definitely a handful of people that just really couldn't function. And I totally get that. I'm not trying to say I'm a better person, but I think in terms of, if you look at it from a cold, calculated perspective, I was able to detach. Long term, I don't know if that's a huge red flag mental health wise, but just for the function of the job, it was definitely best.
I would just say, and again, from personal experience, but talking to people on the podcast, at some point in time, you'll have to unpack it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's all going to be a traumatic experience and it's going to be awful, but it's that box in the garage that eventually, whether you move, whether you just clean the garage out of habit, or you're looking for something, you'll go through that box. You will. It'll just happen.
Yeah. I unpacked the box. Yeah, about maybe a year and a half later, and I basically spent most of my early 20s being a completely non-functional person.
Really?
Oh yeah, I'm drinking a glass of wine right now, but I have a very different relationship with alcohol right now. But yeah, I definitely had alcoholism. I'm talking show up to class at 9 a.m. with a blender bottle that's just a screwdriver. Really irritable. I didn't have, I got angry really fast. A lot of stuff a lot of other guys go through. Thankfully, I was never violent or anything, but just very easily agitated, way too emotional, drank too much, very difficult to have relationships or relate to anyone or anything. I don't know what actually changed it. If it's just through normal growth and adulting, I definitely went to therapy. And the best thing actually happened to me was the Department of Veterans Affairs licensed my dog as an emotional support animal. I got a dog, which was probably the best thing that happened to me. And, basically it gave, it told me I was a psycho, the dog. Cause I would get irritated and then the dog has a toy and it's just it gets more intense with the toy. And I was and I'm motherfucker. And then the dog's it's barking and ripping his toys up. And I was why is the dog crazy? And then that happens 30 times. I was oh, it's me. The dog's feeding off me. I'm an insane person. And then that's when I started to chill out.
That's impressive. That's amazing. I mean, the dog was trained to pick up on that?
No, the dog was not trained at all. This was a $20 pit bull that was about to be put down, actually, because he bit a kid in the face. That was going to adopt him, which, he's fine. Because I asked the question of well, what'd the kid do? Was he putting crayons in his ear? Did the dog just run up? You know what I mean? It was one of those things I asked him because they were trying to talk me out of adopting the dog. I said, no, it's fine. I'll take him. So absolutely no training at all. Because the dog, his name's Truman. He had aggressive issues too, beyond what I was projecting onto him. So me training him to be less food protective, less aggressive, and more cuddly helped me, but the dog was not he was not a service animal. And I remember the first time he gave me his belly, it was 9 months in. I was holy shit. I've got the dog to the point to trust me. And then I was this is actually working. And that's when I started to piece together as I'm indirectly giving myself therapy.
Makes sense. Wow.
Yeah.
First person I've talked to on the podcast with an emotional support animal. So it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least.
Emotional support animals aren't real. They're service dogs. They're actually trained and licensed. You can bring them on a plane and stuff. And support animals is just, you don't have to pay animal fees if you rent But there's no license or training. It's just honestly, most people use it as a way to just get their dogs into apartment buildings. Really, you can pay any quack online to $100 to write you up a certificate to say your peacock's an emotional support animal, and you can get on. It's a system that's been abused for sure. But the VA, there's no easy access to service animals or anything like that. So my doctor was just smart, because I was actually just complaining about I couldn't find an apartment that would rent out to me, because I got a dog and it's a pit bull, which are considered aggressive breeds for no real reason, and landlords don't let you have pit bulls. And then my doctor at the VA, this is Cincinnati VA, was just smart and connected all those things at once. Like, this guy needs an apartment and he needs his dog, so let's just solve this problem with one letter with VA masthead, and everything basically started coming together.
Right. Back to the deployment here. You talk about, being in contact once a week. Is there any part of you throughout the deployment that, starts to realize this is too much, or I'm not going to come home if we keep up at this pace? Any of those thoughts creep into your head?
That's hard. I don't think so. I think I got a weird adrenaline addiction. Obviously, it's scary at the time. It's intense. A lot of bad things can happen, but I didn't like when we weren't engaged, which is weird. There's the hard engagements that suck and they're bad and they're terrible and people are getting hurt, and then there's the guy taking some pop shots at you. No one's in any like real danger. You're undercover, and that's the stuff that, looking back on it, I think there's like an adrenaline junkie thing that can get off on that. And then there's the real firefights that are scary, but I think I was too young at the time to really think about it, like really stop, and like the danger didn't really set. I don't remember it really setting in, even when we had injuries and deaths. And that's not me being a badass or anything. I think there was just like a safety mechanism in my weird little brain or anything, and nothing came together until it was over.
Do you think that had you been able to acknowledge that at the time, it might not have taken you so long to unpack everything that you needed to unpack?
Probably. It's like people I've dated where you don't realize it's terrible when it's happening, and then like 3 months afterwards, and all your friends tell you they were crazy, and you're just like, oh, that was terrible. That was awful. I can't believe I did that. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah, no, I guess that makes sense. I can't argue with the
like you can't see it when you're there. And then when we weren't, we actually had pretty good setups at the fob, about midway through the deployment, where we were able to play like Xbox and stuff like that. So there is plenty of ways to kind of take your mind off things when you weren't in it.
How does the deployment end?
Super anticlimactically. We did our last patrol. We did the handoff to this other unit coming in. I want to say it was like Tennessee Guard or something. It was another Guard unit. I think it was Tennessee. Did the handoff. Nothing happened really. It felt cool being like the veteran with the new guys coming in that were young and full of piss and vinegar, and you're just like these jokers. And it's like, that was just me like 11 months ago. We're like, let me tell you about War Son. And it was just like, dude, you were this exact same kid like not long ago. And you did one deployment. Let's chill a little bit.
So you get back home.
Yeah.
Obviously family's happy. Everybody's happy. What's the next phase for you? What's the next stage?
Yeah. So
you finished school yet at this point?
No, I was in school for like 7 years.
Super senior. All right.
Yeah, with the deployment, and then I dropped one semester once to go to BLC because I was all hooah to get my promotion, and stuff like that. It's probably a good 7 years or so. And like I said, I had a lot of problems at that time, so a lot of didn't take school very seriously. I came home. Mom picked me up. I don't have a large family. I had a girlfriend at the time that didn't make it through the deployment, and then lived with my mom for like a week or two, then got my own apartment, and then the semester started. I think we talk about combat and like gunfights and stuff, and that's really cool, but I think the weirdest, like hardest part of deployment, it wasn't any specific engagement or anything like that. It was I'll never forget this. I was in a journalism class actually, and it was just the timing how things worked out. It was I think it was like 2-3 weeks after the deployment, and I remember sitting in the class and I was like thinking, I was in a gunfight less than 2 months ago, and now I'm just like in this class.
Yeah.
And it was just weird. I was like unshowered. I was shooting a machine gun, and then you go back to the fob and you tell your inappropriate jokes with the boys and stuff like that. Now I'm in like a college classroom. I'm clean, and just some guys telling me how to do journalism. And it was that juxtaposition was probably the hardest part, or the weirdest part.
Did you know you wanted to do journalism? When did you find that out?
I have always wanted to do journalism, actually. I just didn't know where I fit in journalism. My biggest regret is I got a lot of good photos from my deployment. I got no video of it. Going back, I wish I had like a GoPro. I just didn't think about that.
Back in my day, all I had was a little digital camera that had a video function on it, and I would put it on the dashboard.
Yeah.
With an SD card in it. I'd put it on the dashboard of the vehicle and just record us driving.
Yeah. If I knew I wanted to do like military journalism or like knew what was going on, I would have like documented everything to a T with like video and stuff like that. But now all I got are like maybe like 30 like cool guy photos of me holding 240s or whatever. Right. So yeah, get back. Was the editor of the school paper for a while, did some internships at a local Fox affiliate, the local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer. And then this takes us to 2014, 15. I get a job at Politico to come out here to DC. Again, go back to the young man thing. I didn't know how much money it costs to live in DC. And Politico's a great company, but they were paying me $40,000, and you can't get an apartment in DC for under probably $1,800. And I had to go to this like tax subsidized apartment, and that was maybe about $1,100. So Politico's a great company. It's just an entry level job, and I wasn't willing to have roommates,
And you weren't willing to drive, an hour to get to work every day if you were going to move north of the suburbs or anything else.
No, not at all. Not at all. You can't do that. So I worked there. I worked there for a while. That was my first job. And then I bounced around. I got an editor job at the Examiner. And then it clicks in my head. It finally clicks in my head like, oh, because a couple people kept telling me to like look into writing about the military. And it didn't click until I was at the Examiner. Because there's a lot of people that cover the military and do it really great, but the hardest part is just the jargon, the culture, stuff like that. And that stuff, myself and there's some other great reporters like Laporta at the AP and stuff like that, that you just can't make that person. And I was like, oh, that's a little niche for me. And that's, I was at the Examiner for about a year. And then Stars and Stripes offered me a job.
The paper you read downrange. I mean, what a thrill.
Yeah. I read Star. We didn't really have good internet, and we actually got Stars and Stripes like it was Vietnam, just read copies of that, get in there. And then that's when I started covering Congress and the VA.
Okay. So, two-part question here. Mm-hmm. One, again, with going back to cover the military and the combat experience, is any of you aware of what's going on under the surface with you at that point in time? And two, is any of that more difficult to cover because there may have been?
Yeah. So I'm not going to say I don't have problems now, but like the peak of issues was up until the point roughly I moved to DC, and then maybe a little time after that. So around the time I get to Stripes is about the time I get my shit together and I become a functional human being again.
All right. So then taking this job kind of, did you realize how much you would actually enjoy covering the military, even after spending a good amount of time in it?
No, actually, like before that, that was my biggest hesitancy because I was like, hey, I've got like I was just like tired of it. I actually wanted to go originally into like environmental reporting because I majored in environmental policy in college, and I'm really interested in like climate change policy and stuff like that. And I got dragged into military reporting, but I love it. It it's weird because I'm still in, and my rank largely doesn't matter, but no one else in my position can just talk to the sergeant major of the Army or ask the Pentagon any question they want at any time,
Right.
or call any base, any sergeant major, talking to generals. That is a weird, unique opportunity that I don't think any enlisted person has ever had. And that's an opportunity I don't want to waste because I like to write everything for the people at the company level. That's who I think about when I write about stuff. Does this story I'm writing make sense to an E4? Is kind of the question I ask myself. Right. So I think coming in with that enlisted perspective is just such a unique opportunity and something that I don't think a lot of it's hard to find that in other places.
Sure. I want to dive more into the journalism stuff. I just had one more question in relation to the actual military portion of your career. So you get back, you continue to move through the ranks. You're still currently serving, as you just mentioned right now. One, are you surprised you never deployed again? And two, what are the rest of the goals for your military career?
Yeah, I kind of am surprised I never got to deploy again. I think, I got to go during the Obama surge, and it's largely tampered off since then. I'm like the combat deployments are kind of over. Afghanistan's over. Yeah. Iraq, Syria. Between Iraq and Syria, we have about 1,200 people total between those two countries. And that's about it. Other than that, your Kuwaits are, do you want to go to Europe? There's Djibouti. There's Kuwait, and I'm just not interested in that stuff. I think I got in, and when I started being able to deploy, it was at basically the tail end. It was the all must go sale at the store, and now the shelves are empty.
Are you staying in for 20? Do you think, or
I got to? It's too easy. The National Guard it's too easy. They don't ask a lot. I'm guaranteed. It's weird because I do this journalism thing. If I go to the Capitol or the Pentagon or anything, I'm in a suit. It's clean. I'm writing for a living. I'm talking to people. But then randomly once a month, I get to go like run around the woods with face paint on and do mount training. It's this weird juxtaposition that I love.
So with that, obviously your chain of command knows what you do.
Oh yeah, they know.
Yeah. Well, similarly, we have sort of the same crux of being media members who also happen to have a job that, yours requires you to cover it directly. I do it ancillarily. But that said, again, have they ever called you into the office to have a conversation about your reporting?
No. Yes and no. So
the fact that you had to pause on that answer means that apparently something happened.
Yeah. So public affairs people, immediately, and I gotta keep this vague and in fairness to them, do not like me and do not like me Beynon. And those are public affairs people that are immediately adjacent to me. I have really great relationships with people outside that circle, rather it be the Pentagon, the National Guard Bureau is one of my best. I think they're some of the best public affairs people in the business, and I work with them a lot. But there's a lot of suspicion on their level, on the state level. But once it goes beyond that, it's completely fine. And I'll have to leave it at that. But in my immediate chain of command, they love it. My platoon sergeant several times has always said, he's like, I never thought how cool it would be to have a reporter in the platoon. They like, frankly, like knowing things. Like I come in, they ask me what's going on in the Army. And they think it's really, my first sergeant thinks is really interesting. Like, I talked to the sergeant major of the Army a couple weeks ago, and he just thinks that's cool. And he understands a good National Guard command knows how to leverage people's talents and integrate them and stuff.
Yes.
You're an infantryman, but what else do you do? And that is the advantage. That is an advantage National Guard has over active duty, because you get in these situations where you're surprised what skills become relevant. Rather, someone's a carpenter, a cop, or a mechanic, or whatever. There's weird places those skills come in.
100%. On my first deployment, I had a 74 Delta, which I think is a chem NCO, who on the side was a IT guy and a network guy. And he literally built an entire network for us in our house in Iraq, because he had the skill set to do it. And we had our own internet. He bounced it off a satellite. I think he told me in Greece or something. And we had our own internet in the house for free.
Yeah, that's something you're just not going to get. And like on our COVID mission, I gave my chain of command like the media briefing, like how the pandemic is being covered by local national outlets, numbers from Johns Hopkins, because I know how to get that stuff like quickly. They knew how to utilize me. And on the other end of that, there's never been a situation where the Army's trying to take advantage of that from like an ethical level, if that makes sense. There's never been can you write this puff piece? That has never happened. And I will
agree with you that, and saying it as a former one, state level PAOs suck. Those PA folks are terrible. They're minions, they're sheep, and they suck, and they don't have the idea of what public affairs is supposed to be. At the larger level, I think you run into some really solid professionals.
Yeah, no, I've noticed the state level PAOs generally, there are outliers that are really good. I'll give a shout out to Vermont has a great PAO, for example. But I think it's hard for them to get it, and I don't know if it was
for a general who decides their welfare.
Yeah. And I don't understand. And I never understood. It's like, why would you have an issue with a reporter in the ranks? Because this came up during the pandemic mission, and I was just like, we're feeding poor people. Like, what am I going to do? Leak to the press that we're giving oranges out to low income families? Like, what do you want? Like, is that what you're afraid of? Like, what is that? like what black ops is this? Like, if anything, you want me to do that, But that never got leveraged. But yeah, the chain of command, they really love it. They feel like their perspective is, hey, like half the Army news basically comes from one of my guys, and that's exciting to them, which I understand too.
I agree. It is smart. However, I think I told you the piece you interviewed me for on the ACFT, I got a phone call from. I got a phone call for that.
You got a phone call. I
got a phone call from another person of the same rank to sit there and tell me I didn't have permission to do the interview. I turned around and said, I don't need your permission to do the interview.
What would they say when you said that?
Yes, you do. I said, okay, it's a mutual colleague in the media. He called me and asked me a question. I answered it. It wasn't an interview. And a discussion. Like, it wasn't an interview.
And it's not like you were commenting on something controversial.
No. And again, and he said, he's like, well, you were the only person in the article who was quoted. I go, he asked me if I could quote him. I said, yes. I said, I'm like, I have no problem with what I said. I'd say it to anybody out loud. I'd say it to the general's face. I stand behind everything I said, and nothing I said was a lie. What do I have to worry about?
Yeah, for people listening, I wrote a story on the ACFT, and I think you were telling me about some logistical challenges, which is
getting the actual equipment.
Yeah,
and the time it takes to conduct one, and how a commander at a company level has to decide, am I going to forego 4 hours of training to conduct a test that doesn't get me any better in readiness?
Which is a very no shit take. No, I'm glad you told me, but that is the opinion everyone has. No one doesn't have that, like if you ask that PAO that, you're like, what do you think about the ACFT? Do you think it's hard do you think the ACFT is hard logistically on guard units? Like who says no to that?
Again, it's a thing. And I said, look, there's no, if I don't believe what I'm going to say enough to put my name on it, then I shouldn't say it, period. Like,
no, I agree. Yeah.
I'm a responsible, adult and an officer in the Army. Like, there's no reason for me to hide behind this. Some people get nervous about it. I didn't say anything controversial. And by the way, I would like to point out, and I think that's a slight difference. You talked a moment ago about how the first sergeant loves it, the platoon sergeant loves it. I think that's the difference between, honestly, the enlisted folk and the officer side. You guys love it because it's access to information that you're probably not going to get otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. You can feed the first sergeant information and everything, give them big picture stuff that they may never have a conversation on with commanders. I, on the other hand, as a senior 05, like, you know, for me, now it's a threat to the rest of their power structure.
Yeah.
Right?
And it was such a benign, like, it was ultimately such a vanilla story, but it's not like you were like, hey, do you want to hear some shit about the tag? Then I'd understand. I'd be like, hey man, like, I don't think you want your name in this story. Like, I'll take it, but I am going to recommend against it for your own sake.
Seriously. Again,
with that's another thing with sources and soldiers. Like, that's sometimes they tell me it's okay, and like, you always want to name in a story, but like a lot of times, you know, I'm like, you just want to avoid this headache, because some people get mad at anonymous sources, and it's a lot of times it's like that. Like, you can handle telling the PA, you know, to go pound sand, but an E4, that's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and in your line of work, obviously, you have to talk to people in uniform to get an unabashed point of view.
Yeah.
And a lot of these soldiers understand the risk that they're taking, especially now in the social media world. They've seen other people get in a lot of trouble for saying things and doing things online, and they don't want to risk their career, which again, it's a fair position for them to be in. But, and I will give you credit. If you follow Steve on Twitter, he is always saying, hey, I need information for a story. Somebody DM me. Yeah. You know, and people, I assume more than enough people are willing to respond to your questions.
That perspective is so important. Any story I write, assume I talk to twice as many people that are actually quoted. A lot of times I'll just talk to people if it's a story about, I don't know, like maybe some weird changes to promotions, right? Like I'm talking to people just on background or honestly, like, hey, just make sure I understand this correctly. Like, I'm talking to people like that.
Right.
And it's really important. It sounds selfish because obviously I benefit from it, but it's really important for soldiers to talk to the press.
Yes.
No reporter, including me, of any legitimacy is going to write some huge, in most cases, there's a dichotomy to this, but no one's going to take the word of just one E3 and just run wild with it in a lot of cases. But it's really important for people to talk to us because things don't get it sucks, but things do not get changed until they're in the press and people like us.
In our organization.
Yeah.
I mean,
or Military Times, until they start asking PAOs and sergeants major, and that's not how it should be, but that really is the fastest and only way to fix things. And I'll give an example because I went to the press over a pay issue during the pandemic. Now, I was in the press, but I went to a different outlet to complain that the state was a month behind on pay because I was pissed. I was like, I can afford this, but I got privates that this is their income and they haven't been paid and we're not getting an answer. And I told the first sergeant, I was like, hey, I'm going to talk to a journalist about this. And he said, cool. I was like, all right, I'm just letting you know. And I complained about it. I put my name on it, said, hey, our soldiers aren't getting paid. This is a backstabbing to a force that have left their jobs for this mission. And the pay got fixed in 2 days. Like that sucks. That's the only, and that's the way to fix things. And I understand that people are scared to talk to the press. Obviously, if you don't have to talk to me, there's plenty of other people. You can negotiate anonymity. Stuff, figure out how you want to be referenced, like an NCO in the Guard, stuff like that. Because that really is the best. People need to be held accountable in the military for mistakes, but reporters, we can't know everything, and we rely on people to come to us with problems.
To that end, you know, we're in really muddy times when it comes to the military and the way they're covered and how they're politicized and everything else. Have you come across a scenario where those two roads intersected and, you know, your moral compass was sort of not working correctly in a sense that not like you were doing something wrong, but just like one of those issues where it's like, I don't know if I can report on this kind of deal.
You mean, give me like a hypothetical example of what you mean.
Whether it's, wrongdoing by somebody in your immediate chain of command or,
got it.
This is going to give a massive black eye to the National Guard across the board, and I'm a member of the National Guard, the Ohio National Guard, whatever it may be.
Oh yeah, I don't care. I'll write an article tomorrow that thanks to the National Guard. I don't care. But the only separation I have is I won't report on anything that I'm close to. A good example, like I was on the Capitol mission. I was there on January 6th. Like I didn't report on the guards' role in that mission directly, if that makes sense. Um, there was and that's just conflict of interest things. Like big level guard stuff, I'm fine with. But once it gets to things I was directly involved with, I can't do that. Another good example is we had a soldier in our unit that was arrested pretty recently on child pornography charges. Obviously, that's something that happened in the Army that would directly be in my jurisdiction, but I didn't write it because he was in my unit. I knew him. So anything that's really in my state or anything I touch from a military perspective, I'm not going to report on.
Is that just a personal thing, or is that somewhat of a directive somewhere?
It's a personal thing, and obviously, like, yeah. So, like, yeah, it's a personal thing. So I put that own role myself, but I'd imagine if for some weird reason I didn't care, my editors would have the exact same opinion.
Oh, really? I was just going to ask you if they would ever force you, hey, dude, the guys in your state, go get a quote from them.
Oh yeah, yeah. If they, yeah, no, they're smart about that. Like I flag it to them. Like I'll be like, hey, this is a story going on, but I know this guy. He's in my unit. I can't write it. Another good example is let's say like my state lost a rifle. Like that's a story I'd write. Like I wouldn't write that. So it's a lot of but there's wiggle. So I say like I'm not going to write about missions I was involved with, but broadly I would write about the pandemic relief stuff, even though I wasn't involved. But I wouldn't write about my unit or state's involvement in particular, if that makes any sense. Or I deployed to Afghanistan. I'll write about Afghanistan, but not my unit's mission in Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah. And to a certain extent, I guess I kind of hold the same maxim in a sense where if it applies to my state, I talk in very broad terms.
Yeah.
If it's something about somebody else's state, I have no problem ripping it to shreds.
Yeah.
And it's a fine line. I mean, again, at this point in my career, it's, I'm over 20 years. Really, all they're going to do is send me packing with a retirement. Say, see, take retirement away, I guess, if it's egregious enough. But I don't think I would ever do anything egregious enough to that standpoint. But still, it's diminishing returns for me to embarrass my own organization, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no win in that for anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's I won't use any military privileges for anything. Like I won't log into Mill Suite to get documents. That might be helpful to me. I have plenty of sources that monitor that stuff and they'll give them to me for me, but I won't go to I won't go to my Army email for force-wide memos or anything like that. So like no, and I can't source soldiers I know from my own like military duty, if that makes sense. It's real easy. If I needed to get a soldier's perspective on thing, like I know 100 of them, but I need to find other people, like people I don't know from a military perspective.
What's the toughest part about covering the military right now?
I think we go back to, I know there's a lot of issues going on, and it's about finding soldiers that trust you. There's so many problems going on that we don't know about. And it's opening up that line of communication and letting soldiers know we're here to shine light on whatever problem you're running into and hold people accountable. It's spreading the word that we're a resource for that.
How much do you trust the high level military? And I asked that sort of as a loaded question from the standpoint of, they have a long track record of not holding themselves accountable properly on a variety of issues. Let's just start with sexual assault and sexual harassment from the beginning.
Yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with the drone strike that killed civilians, and they told us there was a secondary explosion that could have had an IED in it.
So, how much do you, knowing the inner workings of it, how much do you trust when you talk to Guard Bureau, you talk to the Secretary of Defense or whoever it may be, that office, off of OSD? How much do you feel like they're straight with you?
This might sound, there's a difference between lying and then like coming to things with being wrong with good intentions. And that's the kind of thing where the drone strike might explain that. I don't know. I think everyone has good intentions and if they don't want to tell you something, they're just going to tell you. It's about shifting through it's also about shifting through the bullshit and getting through the public affairs line that I believe that they believe is true. But I need to talk to E4s, E5s, E6s. That's who I need. So I think they're lying. No, in a lot of cases, because if they are, that's a bigger story.
Right.
If I catch them in a lie, like frankly, they're fucked. If I could be a little crude.
No,
I think it's and you talk about like something like sexual assault or losing the war in Afghanistan. The problem is the machine is so big.
yes.
That's the problem. It's who's at fault. And if you fire that guy, well, you got to fire that guy. If you fire that guy, it turns into a situation where, okay, well, if we start putting heads on spikes for the Kabul withdrawal, does that end up being half the DOD? And then Biden just doesn't have leadership anymore. Like so I think that's the problem. It's not necessarily like the accountability, like it's just there's too many chefs in the kitchen. And when like sexual, it's like Fort Hood, right? What was it? I think it was like more than a dozen people that were fired.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's great, but I don't know how far you can take that and still have.
Yeah. Well, I remember Abu Ghraib. When Abu Ghraib got adjudicated, it was a 2-star general and an E4 were the people who got in trouble. Mm-hmm. There's a canyon of people in between those two individuals.
Yeah.
Those were the only two people who were ultimately held accountable. I mean, I know a company commander got relieved and a first sergeant got relieved, but come on, at the end of the day, like, you know, the people who got in serious trouble were an E4 and a 2-star general. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's when I get a statement from public affairs people or something like that, I believe that they believe it's true. My mission is that actually true, and does that paint an accurate picture for on the ground? It's the classic military thing. What does a 1-star tell you versus a private? The 1-star might think he's right, but he might not be, and that's where we get into intentions.
Since your title is ground combat reporter, now that we have no more ground combat left, are you forced to kind of change the direction of your job?
Yeah, I mean that's what we would call like a beat specialty. Right. I mean, like I do a lot of others. Like I actually do a lot of GI Bill coverage. That's like my baby. As you know, I cover a lot of the ACFT. But yeah, combat is definitely coming to a close. But there's always going to be there's new vehicles, there's new guns, there's new schools and stuff like that. And someone in my mind, there's going to be another conflict at some point, and someone needs to kind of be ready for that, I guess.
Leave your reporter hat on here for a minute.
Okay.
Because the staff sergeant hat will probably have a much different answer. Mm-hmm. But in the time you've been covering the military, it feels like it's changed so much.
Oh yeah.
It almost to a point where the organization to certain people says it's unrecognizable. Mm-hmm. As a reporter, is that expected? Is it fair? Have they changed too much? Because again, I know the staff sergeant gives me a different answer.
Yeah. So the reporter. Okay. So the reporter hat. I think the military's changed substantially. It's don't ask. You go to don't ask, don't tell. That was repealed 10 years ago.
Yep.
It feels to me that is a policy from the late 19th century. But that was while I was in, and I really like can't get over how crazy that was. Like that's probably the worst social policy the military has had since segregation. Trans people can serve now. Women can serve in combat roles. Women can have braids. We're thinking about uniforms that are more female friendly. It's a more inclusive force, and when people hear that, I'm not talking about the woke diversity Olympics you would see in like a college application photo. It's legitimately taking like just, hey, who wants to be in the infantry and go fight the enemy? Like anyone can do it. That can pass these series of events, and I think that's great, and that's going to lead to a much more powerful military. It's also changed how we assess soldiers. There's a new rifle qualification that's frankly better than the old one. There's magazine changes, different stances while targets are still popping up. The ACFT, it's a bitch to run. It's a logistical nightmare, but it is better than the old fitness test. It is better at assessing your level of strength and cardio, and it is changing how soldiers train. Soldiers are doing more CrossFit style strength training workouts versus just let's go on runs and ruck marches. And that's probably going to lead to
I'd argue you don't need 2 miles at the end. 1 mile is fine.
I'll agree with that. And more just from there's a lot of room to change it and tweak it. But I think the idea and intent is probably better than the old test. And I think we're going to see some better results. So from that perspective, the Army has radically changed. And you look at social media, like you look at the kind of issues. The Sergeant Major of the Army is super active on social media. And I think it's good because he sees a microcosm and he sees an echo chamber, but he does see things. Other Sergeants Major are also on Facebook and Twitter, and it's easier for them to engage. Like back in the day in Vietnam, no E3 is sending the Sergeant Majors of the Army a message. That is not happening. But now they can. Do they? And do they do it when appropriate?
Hell, didn't happen when I was commissioned.
Yeah, definitely a different question of when it's appropriate, but they can do it. And they can reach people like me or Davis Winke at Military Times or Haley at Task and Purpose, all these talented reporters, going back to this is the only way to really change things. Like it's easier to access the press. It's easier to access leadership, and it's easier for the press and leadership to see the issues. So I think we're in a radically different Army and mostly for the better.
I'll ask you about hashtag Mill Twitter.
Yeah.
What an interesting place to be. I will say this much.
Am I hashtag no Twitter? Are you hashtag no Twitter?
I don't know.
Are we in the club?
I think we are. I just sort of find myself being pulled into it because I follow enough people who are in it. But I had this conversation with a colleague, in reference to Mill Twitter. And I said, look, obviously Twitter is just like a cesspool, right? I mean, it's never a place that you want. But I'll say this about Mill Twitter. For all the things there, Mill Twitter usually is kind of like in that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? When you poll the audience, usually one answer is unequivocally, that's where Mill Twitter is. They usually get you the right answer on any given topic, and the majority tends to agree on that. And I kind of feel like as much as the wackos are out there and the crazy hot takes are out there, Mill Twitter has a good sort of compass in that standpoint.
Yeah, I think I'm glad the military has become like most other major communities. There's examples of political candidates running campaigns based on what Twitter tells them, and it usually blows up in their face. That said, obviously I see hot takes and people being just, lunatics, tagging people when they shouldn't be. Like, obviously there's a dichotomy here, but I think largely it goes back to what is the overall take. And I think it is a good avenue for, like, going back to the press to keep their ear to the ground. Not the best way, but it's another way. It's a good way for people like me to build sources or talk to people that are smart on issues, going back to just talking to people on background, like just making sure I'm tracking the issue correctly, and for them to reach senior leaders. Now, again, it is an echo chamber. It's a bubble, but it's an okay tool if you view it as a supplement if you want to understand the Army.
Like I said, just Mill Twitter encapsulated. When one reporter from MSNBC tried to say The Hurt Locker was a good movie, Mill Twitter corrected him on what horseshit that movie actually was. So,
Oh God. What? Yeah, that's bad. What's your favorite military movie?
Somewhere between Black Hawk Down. Is probably near the top of the list. Again, we always grade these things on accuracy, right? On their ability to simulate combat. I thought Lone Survivor was pretty much dog crap from a factual accuracy standpoint. I will say The Outpost. I know they had to condense a lot of time into a short, and we've had Rod Lurie on the show here, and I told him as such. Put it this way: if the combat scenes make my hands start to shake and adrenaline starts to rush because it makes me feel like I'm there again, then they're hitting the right notes. Black Hawk Down absolutely does that. I think the combat scenes in The Outpost for the last 90 minutes of it absolutely do that. I think from that standpoint, they hit the right notes. What other ones are really good? Saving Private Ryan, yay and nay. I didn't fight in World War II, so it's a little bit different. I never had the experience of standing bad guys on one side, good guys on the other, and just shooting at each other nonstop. So it's a little bit of a different mantra, but I do think some of the combat scenes are a little bit Hollywoodized. If that's
I think Saving Private Ryan's kind of boring, but I like it for the opening scene. Just the just the opening scene is just such a like a buckle up motherfucker, we're going to war scene.
Exactly.
Like just no mercy. I think the only thing I would add to that is Generation Kill, because I think Generation Kill is weird to recommend to a civilian, just because I think that shows almost speaks a different language. Sure. Like it's such an impenetrable show. Like I tried to watch it just from like someone who doesn't know anything, and there's just so much. It's such a weirdly subtle show. Like I've probably seen it 4 times, and I pick up on different storylines every time I watch it. Like weird little conflicts they have between 2 side characters. It's a strange show, but I like it because I like whenever someone's like, "Hey, what's the best thing to watch that'll give me an understanding of the military?" I was like, "Watch Generation Kill," because I feel like I've had most or similar conversations than most scenes in that show, just because it's so just general military guys bantering with each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. So anyway, but it's a whole different. That basically again encapsulates Mill Twitter. They'll set your compass straight, to say the least.
What we're saying, Mill Twitter, I think it can be a force for good. It's good most of the time, but like every online community can be bad.
Absolutely. Listen, brother, it's been great catching up with you. I've enjoyed the heck out of the conversation. Again, follow him on Twitter at Stephen Beynon, Beynon, Steve N-O-N, even though it's pronounced Beynon, it's N-O-N. So you get all the information there. Again, military.com is a great resource for everything. I certainly appreciate you sharing some time with us and your story. I hope that you'll send this out to all of your followers when it's all said and done, so they can get the backstory to all of your wonderful writings that we see on the web.
Awesome, man. Hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Steve Beynon, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.